Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she visits Vancouver for its annual Shakespeare Festival. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The June morning in Vancouver was bright and clear, the kind of day that locals claimed made the 9 months of rain worthwhile. Lyla stood at their hotel window, looking out at the city. Mountains rising behind downtown, the harbor visible in the distance, everything green and vibrant under the early summer sun. She was here with her besties, Marina, Beth, Claire, and Josie. Their friendship went back to college days and shared apartments and late-night conversations that had solved the world's problems. Life had scattered them across different cities, different careers, different paths. But the bond had remained, kept alive at meetups when they took turns choosing amazing global locations. This time they were in Vancouver for the Bard on the Beach Shakespeare Festival, held in the city every summer. They were excited, except maybe for Beth. She took a little convincing. "Is everyone ready?" Marina asked, checking her bag as they gathered in the hotel lobby. "Bike rental opens at 9. "I still think we should have just taken a car around Stanley Park," Claire said, tying her sneakers. "I haven't ridden a bike in a long time." "It's barely 6 miles around the whole seawall," Josie said, "not the Tour de France. And we're only doing part of it. You'll survive." "Okay, coach," Claire muttered. Beth was quiet, looking at the program for that evening's Shakespeare performance, looking doubtful. Marina noticed and sat down next to her. "Ready to travel back in time?" "I don't know," Beth said. "The language from this era is beautiful, but it's hard to follow sometimes." "I think you'll like it," Marina responded. "Outdoor Shakespeare in a tent by the water with the mountains in the background, that's pretty special even if you're not a super fan. Plus it's Bard on the Beach's opening night," Lyla added. "The energy is supposed to be electric." They left the hotel, walked to Stanley Park, entering through the tree-lined paths that led from the downtown edge into the massive urban forest. The park was over 1,000 acres, mostly old-growth forests that had somehow survived the city's development. The bike rental place was near the park entrance, and soon they were fitted with bikes and helmets and rolling onto the seawall, the paved path that circled the park's perimeter. "Stay to the right," the rental attendant had warned them. "Walkers on one side, bikes on the other. And watch for the speed cyclists. They'll come up behind you fast." The seawall was beautiful. On their left, the dense forest of Stanley Park. On their right, the waters of Burrard Inlet with the North Shore Mountains rising beyond. The June morning was perfect for biking, warm but not hot, the air clean and fresh. They rode single file mostly, sometimes bunching up when the path widened, taking their time. Other cyclists passed them, serious riders in spandex, families with kids in bike seats, tourists like themselves stopping frequently to take photos. "This is gorgeous," Lyla called back to the others. The path brought them to Brockton Point, where they stopped to see the totem poles, a collection of First Nations carved poles standing in a clearing overlooking the water. The poles were tall and intricately carved, each one telling a story through the figures of ravens and bears and eagles and humans. These are from different coastal First Nations, a man told a small group that had gathered. He appeared to be a volunteer guide. They're from different peoples, with different artistic traditions, but all part of the broader Northwest Coast culture. They walked among the poles, admiring the craftsmanship and the stories carved into the wood. Each pole was different, some painted in bright colors, others left natural, some depicting single figures, others showing complex narratives stacked vertically. "The detail is incredible," Beth said, looking at a Thunderbird figure. "How long does it take to carve one of these?" "Months, sometimes over a year," the guide said. "It's not just the carving, it's the ceremony, the preparation, the understanding of what story you're telling and why. These aren't just art objects, they're cultural heritage." From the totem poles, they biked to the Brockton Point Lighthouse, a small red and white structure perched at the edge of the peninsula. The lighthouse wasn't tall or particularly impressive, but its setting was beautiful, the water stretching out on three sides, freighters anchored in the distance, waiting for berths in the harbor. The path continued along the northern edge of the park, and soon the Lionsgate Bridge came into view, the elegant suspension bridge connecting Vancouver to the North Shore, its towers painted in distinctive international orange. They stopped at a viewpoint where the bridge was perfectly framed by trees, the mountains rising behind it, the city visible in the distance. Lyla stood with her bike, just taking in the scene. The combination of urban infrastructure and natural beauty, the way the bridge seemed to belong in the landscape rather than imposing on it. "I love it here," Marina said, taking photos. "It's like they figured out how to build a major city without completely destroying the nature around it." "Helps when you have oceans and mountains on all sides," Josie pointed out. "Forces you to work with the landscape." They biked on, eventually completing their loop and returning the bikes. From Stanley Park, they walked toward Cole Harbor, the upscale neighborhood at the edge of downtown. Cole Harbor was all marinas and waterfront condos, the harbor filled with boats ranging from working vessels to massive yachts. But what caught everyone's attention were the float planes, small aircraft taking off and landing on the water, their pontoons creating spray as they accelerated across the harbor. "That's the coolest airport I've ever seen," Claire said, watching a plane lift off and bank toward the mountains. They found a spot to sit and watch the harbor activity. Float planes arrived and departed, yachts motored in and out, kayakers paddled past, and behind everything, the North Shore mountains rose dramatically, their peaks still holding snow despite it being June. "Those mountains are incredible," Lyla said. "They feel so close, like you could reach out and touch them." "You can ski on them in the morning and be back in the city for lunch," a local woman said, overhearing. She was walking her dog along the seawall. "That's the Vancouver dream. Mountains and ocean, all accessible in 20 minutes. For lunch, they walked to Gastown, Vancouver's oldest neighborhood. The streets here were cobblestoned, the buildings Victorian-era brick. The whole area gentrified but retaining some historical character. The neighborhood was busy with tourists and locals, restaurants and shops filling the ground floors of the old buildings. They found a restaurant with a patio and ordered sandwiches and local beer. While they waited for food, they walked to the steam clock, a quirky tourist attraction that used steam power to mark time with whistles. "This is wonderfully weird," Beth said as the clock whistled on the quarter hour, steam rising from its pipes. "Very Vancouver. Taking something old and making it into something charming and slightly eccentric." After lunch, they browsed through Gastown's boutiques and galleries. Indigenous art galleries showing contemporary and traditional works, clothing shops selling Canadian designers, bookstores specializing in local authors. The neighborhood had successfully balanced commerce with character, touristy, without being completely contrived. In one gallery, they spent 20 minutes admiring prints and carvings by First Nations artists, the distinctive formline designs of the Northwest Coast style, all flowing curves and bold shapes representing animals and ancestral beings. "I love this aesthetic," Marina said. "The way the shapes interlock, the negative space becoming part of the design." "It's a centuries-old artistic tradition," the gallery owner said, "and it's still very much alive. These aren't historical artifacts. They're by contemporary artists who are both honoring tradition and pushing it forward." In the afternoon, they walked to the Falls Creek Ferry Terminal and caught one of the small passenger ferries across to Granville Island. The ferry was tiny, open air, and the ride across Falls Creek offered views of the downtown skyline and the mountains beyond. Granville Island had once been industrial, warehouses and factories occupying the small landmass under the Granville Street Bridge. Now it was a carefully curated mix of markets, galleries, theaters, and restaurants, all maintaining an industrial aesthetic while serving cultural and commercial purposes. The public market was the main attraction, a large building filled with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to flowers to baked goods to prepared foods. The market was busy, locals doing their shopping alongside tourists browsing. They wandered through, sampling as they went. A cheese vendor offered tastes. A bakery had fresh samples. The fruit stands invited them to try local berries. The colors and smells and sounds created a sensory experience that was overwhelming in the best way. "I could live here," Claire said, eating a piece of fresh naan from one of the stalls. "Just eat my way through the market every day." "You say that in every city we visit," Josie reminded her. "I'm a woman of many appetites." They bought provisions for a light early dinner: fresh bread, local cheese, smoked salmon, fruit, and found a spot on the seawall overlooking Falls Creek. The June evening was mild and beautiful, the water calm, kayakers paddling past, the city rising up across the inlet. "We should probably head to Vanier Park soon," Lyla said, checking her phone. "The show starts at 7:30, and they recommended getting there early." They caught another ferry from Granville Island to Vanier Park, this one dropping them right near the Bard on the Beach venue. The park was beautiful. Open lawns, gardens, beaches, the mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. And in the middle of it all, the distinctive white tents of the Shakespeare Festival. The main tent was enormous, its white canvas glowing in the evening light. Through the open sides they could see the stage being prepared, the mountains visible beyond it through the tent's rear opening. People were already gathering, setting up blankets on the lawn outside, buying drinks from concession stands, greeting friends. "I see what you mean," Beth admitted. "The vibe is pretty exciting." They found their seats inside the tent, good ones, close enough to see the actors, faces but not so close they'd missed the full stage picture. The tent gradually filled. conversations creating a pleasant buzz, the atmosphere anticipatory and excited. Opening night energy, Marina said. Everyone's been waiting all winter for this. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the light in the tent changed, golden and warm, the mountains through the back of the tent glowing, the whole scene almost magical. The audience settled, conversations dropping to murmurs, and then the play began. It was a Midsummer Night's Dream, and from the first moments the production was enchanting. The actors were excellent, the comedy landing perfectly, the poetry beautiful. The directors had leaned into the outdoor setting, having characters enter through the audience, using the mountains as part of the scenery, letting the natural light create atmosphere. Lyla watched, completely absorbed. Shakespeare's language was dense, but the actors made it clear through their delivery, their physicality, their obvious love for the text. The comedy was broad and physical, the romance sincere, the magical elements playful and inventive. Beth, sitting next to her, was laughing at the mechanicals' antics, completely engaged. Lyla caught Marina's eye and winked as she nodded at Beth. They both smiled. During intermission, they stayed in their seats, watching the sunset complete itself over the mountains, the tent now lit artificially, but the natural backdrop still visible. "This is special," Beth said, "sitting outdoors, with the mountains in the background, the whole city coming together for this. It's not just theater, it's an event." The second half was even better, the comedy building to chaos, the lovers finding resolution, Puck delivering his final speech directly to the audience, with the mountains behind him as full darkness arrived. The audience erupted in applause at the curtain call, standing, the actors clearly moved by the opening night reception. The energy in the tent was joyful and warm, a shared celebration of theater and summer and community. Outside, the June night was cool and lovely. They walked slowly back toward their hotel, joining the stream of audience members heading into the city, everyone buzzing with the energy of the performance. "Best part?" Marina asked. "The mechanicals. Play within a play," Claire said. "I've never laughed so hard at Shakespeare." "The lovers getting confused in the woods," Josie said. "The physical comedy was brilliant." "Puck," Beth said. "That actor was magnetic. And the way they used the setting, having him exit into the mountains, like he was going back into the wild. Perfect." "All of it," Lyla said. "The language, the setting, the mountains, the whole experience." They continued walking, discussing their favorite moments, quoting lines they remembered, debating interpretations. The conversation flowed naturally, everyone engaged. They walked through the quiet streets back to their hotel, the city settling into its night rhythms. Downtown Vancouver was lovely at this hour, clean and modern, but with enough character to feel interesting, the mountains always present in the background, the ocean always nearby. Back at the hotel, they gathered in one room as usual, too energized from the play to immediately separate. "What a day," Josie said, collapsing into a chair. "Biking, totem poles, float planes, Shakespeare with mountains." "Very Vancouver," Claire agreed. They talked for a while longer, recapping the day's discoveries, but the conversation kept returning to the play, dissecting the director's choices, praising the performances, marveling at the setting. Eventually they dispersed to their rooms. Lyla settled by the window, looking out at Vancouver at night, the lit buildings, the dark shapes of the mountains against the sky. the sense of a city nestled between nature on all sides. She thought about the day, the bike ride along the seawall with the ocean on one side and forest on the other, the totem poles telling their ancient stories, the Lionsgate Bridge framing the mountains, the float planes taking off from Cole Harbor, the vibrant chaos of Granville Island's market, and finally, the magic of Shakespeare performed in a tent with mountains as a backdrop. Vancouver had a distinctive character. Urban sophistication balanced with easy access to nature, multicultural and modern, but respectful of indigenous heritage, literary and artistic, but unpretentious. The city knew how to celebrate. The Shakespeare Festival was clearly beloved, an institution that brought the community together each summer. And she smiled to herself as she thought about Beth. Sometimes the best experiences were the ones you had to be convinced to try. The June night was quiet from her window, just the occasional distant sound of traffic, the city winding down. Tomorrow they'd explore more. Maybe cross the bridge to the North Shore Mountains, or visit one of the neighborhoods they hadn't seen yet, or just return to Stanley Park and spend a day in the forest. But tonight, Lyla held this day, the seawall's perfect path between water and trees, the mountains always present, the market's abundance, and the joy of a midsummer night's dream, performed under canvas with nature itself as scenery. All of it experienced with friends who could appreciate both the beauty of the setting and the pleasure of a great performance, who made every discovery richer by sharing it. The night deepened around her, and somewhere in the city, the white tents of Bard on the beach stood ready for tomorrow's performance, the mountains keeping watch behind them, the ocean nearby, Vancouver holding it all together, nature and culture, wildness and civilization, perfectly balanced on the edge of the Pacific.